Hey guys, welcome to my 10.2 guide for Arcane Mage. We're going to be talking about gameplay mostly. I'm not going to cover super basic stuff like embellishments and stats. The answer to that is just sim it. Like, I'm not going to be some kind of profiteer and tell you what the best thing is with your random gear set at random eye levels. So yeah, just sim it. But we're mainly going to talk about rotation. So if you do not know the very, very basics of our talents, then this might not be the best guide for you. I might refer you to something else. So I'm going to be assuming that you know at least some level of understanding of Arcane, like what our talents do, how does Radiant Spark work, so on and so forth. If you don't know these things, feel free to check out Wowhead. It's quite a useful resource for being able to read the spells and things like that. So the core of our rotation is this cycle, right? My amazing pain skills over here, where you're going to be doing a big burst, and then you're going to be doing a rotation, and then you're going to get to a point where you're going to press shifting. Then you're going to wait a bit, like after some time, you're going to do a mini burst, and then you're going to keep going until you press your Evocate, and then you're going to keep going a bit until you do your big burst again. So obviously there's conditions to each of these being met that will allow you to start your big burst, and then, to do your shifting, and then to do your mini, etc., etc. But then we also have our opener. I'll touch on the opener a little bit later, but yeah. So our core sequences for 10.2 are very similar to Season 1 Arcane, where our big burst will be Radiant Spark, 1, 2, 3 Arcane Blasts. So we consume 0, consume 1, consume 2. And then we Nether Tempest. And then we're going to Surge, and Surge is going to consume 3 and give us the 4th stack of Radiant Spark. And then on that 4th stack, we're going to be pressing Arcane Blast plus Barrage into Touch of the Magi. We press these together so that they can be queued up together, right? Don't overcomplicate spell queue, just press your buttons. It's not that deep. Just press Arcane Blast and then press Barrage. You're going to press these together. And the idea is that both of them are going to benefit from the 4 stack of Radiant Spark. And then after your Barrage is fired from your hands, you want to press Touch of the Magi. Once you press Touch of the Magi, then you're going to just be doing your core rotation, which is Missiles, Blast, Blast, Missile, Blast, Blast, so on and so forth. So just to recap, our big burst is Radiant Spark, 1, 2, 3, Blasts, Nether Tempest, Surge, Arcane Blast, Barrage, Touch of the Magi. If you want to think of it in a different way, we're basically doing 4 abilities with a Nether Tempest before the Surge. Because we don't want to apply Nether Tempest after the Surge, because Surge is a powerful buff, we don't want to waste time applying Nether Tempest after we have the powerful buff. So we apply it before. But at its core, we're casting 4 spells to get our 4th stack of Radiant Spark, and then consuming it with these 2. And then we're going to go Touch the Magi with our core rotation. Now you're going to keep going with this rotation, with the the core rotation inside Touch the Magi, until the buff called Siphon Storm expires. Siphon Storm is a 30-second buff that is applied when you evocate, and every tick of evocate. So it will have 30-second duration at the end of your evocate. So when that 30 seconds is up, that's when you want to press your shifting power. There is some slightly more advanced minor things that I'm not even sure are worthwhile to talk about regarding impetus. I just go by this. It's completely fine. Press whenever Siphon Storm is done and your Touch of the Magi is over, then you press shifting power. At a certain point, you'll be ready to do your mini burst. And we'll talk about the certain point a little bit later. But your mini burst is very similar to your big burst, where it's the same thing. You're going to do Radiant Spark, 1, 2, 3, 4 this time. 4 Arcane Blasts, and then Nether Tempest, and then Arcane Blast plus Barrage, Touch of the Magi. All we're doing is basically substituting Surge with an Arcane Blast, because we need 1 extra hit to make up for the lack of Surge, to give us the final stack, right? Before we consume the final stack. And because we're not getting that big buff from Surge, then we can delay our Nether Tempest 1 global after. Instead of doing it after 3, we're going to be able to do it after 4, since obviously this Arcane Blast doesn't give us a big buff like Surge does. But at its core, it's the same thing. 4 spells into our big burst, into Touch of the Magi. And you're going to keep going with Touch of the Magi, core rotation once again. Missile, Blast, Blast, Missile, Blast, Blast, Missile, Blast, Blast, blah, 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 blah. You're going to keep going with this until you get to very low mana. And you're going to evocate when you're at low mana. And the way you're going to decide how you're going to evocate is this. When Touch of the Magi's cooldown is 15 seconds or less, you're going to press... Oh, I just realized my inequality signs are the other way around. Hee. NA education. I'm actually EU educated, but yeah. Touch of the Magi CD is less than or 15 seconds. Then you want to press Evocate regardless of your mana. But if you are low mana instead, as long as your Touch of the Magi is 20 seconds or less, then it's okay to just press Evocate. The idea here is we want to stall evocating so that we can extend our Siphon Storm buff later towards our big burst, right? Because if you evocate earlier and your cooldowns are, later relative to your evocate, then that means you're going to lose Siphon Storm value in your burst. So we want to delay it. However, if you're low mana and Touch of the Magi is within 20-second cooldown, then it's okay. It's better to evocate than to just sit there AFK not being able to cast anything. And the low mana here, for what it's worth, it represents 10% or lower mana. Basically where you just cannot really cast anything else. Maybe like one Arcane Blast. Alright, so there's something else we should talk about that I actually don't have written down right here, which is Arcane Missile Clipping. So I'm just going to add it here. Clip missiles under or over 30% mana. So what is missile clipping? Very simple. Every time you press your missiles, if it's not our 4-piece proc from our new set bonus, then you'll want to cast Arcane Blast as soon as you can. So when you press missile, if you're above 30% mana or you don't have, if you're above 30% mana and you don't have a 4-piece proc, you just press your Arcane Blast button, like spam that button while you're channeling missiles, and then your missiles will end early and you'll start casting Blast. Obviously, if you are under 30% mana, or you have a 4-piece proc from our new set bonus, you do not want to interrupt missiles. You just let it finish channeling, and then you cast your Arcane Blast. The reason is because missiles is free mana. Obviously, interrupting missiles to cast Arcane Blast is going to consume more mana over time because you're casting more blasts. And also for the 4-piece, the 4-piece just does a ridiculous amount of damage. So obviously, you wouldn't want to be interrupting those. Do not overcomplicate this. You're not doing anything special. You don't have to time anything. You don't have to look out for ticks, something crazy with clipping missiles. Literally just press your missile button, and then once it starts channeling, you just press your Arcane Blast button like constantly, like you normally press your buttons. And whenever it's ready, you will start casting at the perfect time. Okay? Yeah. So, some things to note. What I really recommend if you're learning this spec is when you go to a dummy, execute these sequences with your gear and take note of how much time it takes between your Radiant Spark till your Touch of the Magi. So how long does this sequence take? How long does the mini sequence take? And how long does the Radiant Spark to Surge take? So the moment you press the Radiant Spark to Surge. With my gear right now at my, whatever we have on live servers before the patch hits, to give you an idea, Radiant Spark to Big Touch of the Magi is roughly around 9 to 10 seconds. Radiant Spark to Mini Touch of the Magi is about 8 seconds because it's 1 second shorter, hence no surge. And Radiant Spark to Surge is 5 seconds, right? So, what that tells me is, if my Touch of the Magi is 8 seconds or 9 seconds cooldown, then I can press Radiant Spark to start my mini burst. And that's how you know when you get to start your mini burst after your shifting power. It's when your Touch of the Magi is within that range. Obviously, if you have more haste or less haste than me, this number will be different for you. So that's why I'm not just telling you when Touch of the Magi is 8 seconds you start. Depends on your gear, right? So take note of this really, it's also a good exercise to train. But yeah. This same technique can kind of work for the big burn. Unfortunately, it's not quite as foolproof because of Surge's cast time basically ruins it a little bit, relative because we don't have Surge cast time over here. So there is 1 second wasted with Touch of the Magi cooldown here. So it's actually better to look at Radiant Spark to Surge's cooldown, as long as you haven't delayed Touch of the Magi. So for example, if Touch of the Magi is 8 seconds or 9 seconds remaining on cooldown, and you're within the range of Radiant Spark to Surge, which for me is 5 seconds, then that's how I know I can start this, right? If, for example, Touch of the Magi is 8 seconds, but Surge is 6 seconds or 7 seconds, then if I start this, I won't have Surge up by the time I reach there, which would be a blunder, right? You need both of those conditions active for you to start your big burn. It's not that complicated once you just try it a few times. It's just to make sure that you don't have any wastage of your cooldowns. So those are the important timers. Some people might ask a few things. So for example, we'll cover about the opener. So we talked about the cycle, right? We talked about how you do your big burn, and then you're going to keep going with your big burn until Siphon Storm is done. Once Siphon Storm is done, you're going to press Shifting Power. And then after shifting, you're going to have some time to fill, which is basically the time between your shifting and till Touch of the Magi is for me, it was 8 seconds, right? From when I can start pressing my Radiant Spark. So when Touch of the Magi for me was 8 seconds, I'll press Radiant Spark and I'll start my mini burn. And then after my mini burn is done, which is when Touch of the Magi expires, that's when I'm going to start looking at what is my Evocate condition, right? Which is this one over here. So I'm going to keep going until one of these conditions is met. Just missile, blast, blast, missile, blast, blast, and keep, yeah. Once one of these conditions is met, you can Evocate, and then you're going to just wait until you can start your big burst sequence, which is the same thing here, right? So when Touch of the Magi is whatever, for me it was 9 seconds, and Surge is also within like 5 seconds, then I can start my big burst. However, we still haven't talked about the opener. So what is the opener? The opener here is one that was kind of developed later towards Season 1, and it's a very good opener. It's a little bit different now. It's actually easier to do. What our opener is basically like normal. You're going to press your, you're going to Evocate pre-combat, you're going to double us, you're going to Orb, Arcane Blast, or Arcane Blast Orb, depending on, obviously if you're starting a fight, just Arcane Blast Orb. It makes more sense, right? You're going to Arcane Blast Orb. And then you're going to do one Arcane Blast to just make sure that, you're actually in combat. And then after that first Arcane Blast, apply your Nether Tempest, just because you can effectively. And then from that point on, you're just going to be spamming Arcane Blast and missiles as they come. So as soon as you get a missile proc, just use it. And then after you use it, use your 2 blasts after, right? If you run out of missiles, yeah, just keep blasting. Same as our co-rotation. And you're going to keep going with this without popping any cooldowns yet until you have 200,000 mana remaining. Once you have around 200,000 mana, like 200 to 225k, that's when you start your first big burst. Okay? If you want an explanation as to why, here is why. And if you don't, feel free to skip ahead. The explanation is basically by delaying our big burst, we're going to be pressing Surge later to when we pressed Evocate. And Surge replenishes our entire mana pool because, it burns it all and then replenishes it. So what that means is we're going to have more mana relative to the amount of time left on Evocate's cooldown. So if you imagine you Evocate and then you straight away press your Surge, you don't do this opener, then what happens is that you're going to have to deal with no Evocate for a minute and 20 seconds, right? But doing it this way, after our Surge, it's probably going to be closer to a minute or even 55 seconds, maybe even 50 seconds until your Evocate comes up. And the reason this is useful is because obviously we're doing double lust with this opener, right? We're going to be really down bad with mana because of double lust. So this helps us a huge way. This is only something you do on the pull, you can't control it anywhere else, but it's just something good to do. It does a lot of damage and it's just good in general. I should note you only do this in double lust opener. If you don't lust on the pull, then you don't do this, okay? But that is essentially the opener. So you're going to do that opener, you're going to do your big burn, keep going until Siphon Storm is down, shifting, wait, do the co-rotation until you're ready to do your mini burst. Then you start your mini burst, and then, you keep going until Evocate's ready to go, blah, blah, blah. And in this whole time, every time you're pressing missiles, remember, if you have 4-piece or you're below 30% mana, then you let the missiles fully channel. If you don't have 4-piece and you're above 30% mana, then you can interrupt your missiles by just pressing blast early, right? You don't have to wait for it. There's no timing. Some people might ask some questions. So for example, well, Forgy, what do we do with Presence of Mind? What about Mana Gem and Trinkets, right? It's kind of like the last section over here. So Presence of Mind is very basic. I recommend you utilize this for movement 90% of the time. If you don't need to use it for movement, then the only DPS value out of using it, timing it well, is to use it for when you cannot fit a whole instant cast, or you cannot fit a whole Arcane Blast. So for example, to help visualize this, imagine you have Arcane Blast as, let's say, 1 second cast time. If you have 0.5 seconds left of Touch of the Magi, you obviously cannot fit the whole Arcane Blast, but because Presence of Mind makes Arcane Blast instant, you can fit an Arcane Blast if it was instant. So we say when there is less than 1 GCD remaining on Touch of the Magi, you can Presence of Mind Arcane Blast. To be clear, Presence of Mind does not allow you to cast more Arcane Blasts in general, because instant cast Arcane Blasts still take 1 global cooldown, and the global cooldown is also the equivalent to the cast time of Arcane Blast. So if you were to cast Arcane Blast, normal cast, or Palm Arcane Blast, they will both take the same amount of time. The only difference is For both those Arcane Blasts, the damage happens at the start of that second as opposed to the end of that second. So this only matters if there is a less than 1 second timing that is actually relevant to us, which is basically only Touch of the Magi, right? Technically, you could also make an argument for like Surge, but Touch of the Magi and Surge lines up that way anyway. As for Mana Gem, essentially you're going to have to use a macro to like put it in there. There's different ways of doing it. Like the Mage Discord has some pins. Feel free to refer to those. I personally like to keep it a little bit simpler. I don't like to mess around with a bunch of macros. If you want to be like, really finicky about the optimization, feel free to use the ones in the pins over there. I personally, what I do is I just macro it with my Arcane, but like I have a separate Arcane Blast button, which is this one here. So when I want to do this Arcane Blast with my Arcane Barrage at the end, I'll just press a separate keybind, not my normal keybind for Arcane Blast, and that separate keybind will just be Arcane, like Mana Gem, Arcane Blast, and it'll have like a /CQS at the thing at the bottom, and I'll post it in the description of the video. Yeah. And then you don't have to think about it ever again. Obviously, recraft your Mana Gems in the fight when you run out. Best time to do recrafting Mana Gems is over here, sometime after your mini burst, but before your Evocate. This is the ideal time over here. Yep. As for trinkets, depends on the trinket basically when you use it. A good rule of thumb is look at the duration of the trinket. We want to line it up with our most power. So for example, if you have a 12-second trinket, then you probably want to line it up with your Touch of the Magi, because that's when all our cooldowns are overlapping, and 12 seconds is quite short. If it's 15 seconds, then maybe you can use it, for example, with your Arcane Surge. Or, so basically like right before or right after Surge, depending on how long it is exactly. Or if it's like 20-second duration, then you'll want to be casting it with your Radiant Spark over here. This is obviously just a rule of thumb. It's not 100% guaranteed to be the most optimal thing, but a general idea of how it's going to work. Once again, if you're not really fussed with the optimization, you can usually just slap all your trinkets with this Arcane Blast Mana Gem macro that I talked about, and you'll probably be okay, right? Maybe not optimal, but decent. Yeah, I think that is basically it. I don't have much else to talk about for Arcane. If you have any questions, if I missed something, please let me know in the comments. I'll hopefully be including it in any future parts of the guide. In the next part of the video, I'll be going over a VOD of myself playing Arcane and like talking about it a little bit. So hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.